mean, the vision that I'd had for 20 years of everybody shopping online, and that, gradually over many, many years people were getting on board with. I think when COVID came along and all of a sudden there was just this rapid fast forward shift, it's kind of one of those industrial revolution moments, but in fast forward, and everybody suddenly realised, oh, e-commerce is going to be a thing.
As the year 2000 dawned, most of us were obsessed with this thing called the Y2K bug, which threatened to blow up the internet. And then 21-year-old Kate Morris was wondering if women would prefer to buy their mascara and lippy online. 20 years later, e-retailer Adore Beauty floated on the stock exchange for the first time with a $600 million price tag. And that prompted thousands of women who'd never played the stock market before to buy shares for the first time. Founder Kate Morris takes us inside those lonely years packing boxes inside her garage, all the way to makeup mogul. I'm Kelly Reardon, and Curveball's the show where we take you inside a company at a pivotal moment. We go deep and we get specific with some of the boldest leaders who faced some of the wildest scenarios. Kate Morris is the founder of online retailer Adore Beauty, which was listed on the Australian Stock Exchange in October 2020, 2 decades after she first started packing makeup in her garage and shipping it around the country. But Kate's not resting on her laurels. She's on a mission to leave the beauty industry better than she found it. That means less waste, more sustainable practices, and greater diversity. Kate Morris, welcome to Curveball.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Listen, do you ever wish you stuck it out at law school?
Not for 1 second. No. Of all of the terrible decisions I'm sure I've made over my career, that was not one of them.
Is it because you just sat there in that lecture theatre and thought, this isn't for me? Did you have that entrepreneurial streak right from the start inbuilt in you?
I don't think I did have any entrepreneurial streak, no. So I didn't even know that was there, and I certainly didn't know that was there when I was sitting in my first law lecture. But yeah, I think I'd sort of, done that thing where you go through school and you're really just living up to everybody else's expectations. And, if you could get the marks, then you should do medicine or law. And I thought, well, I don't like blood, so I'll do law. And then, yes, was sitting in my first lecture and just went, oh, no, I don't want to study this for 5 years, and I certainly don't want to have to go and be a lawyer afterwards. I told my parents I was dropping out, and they were thrilled, as you can imagine, and said, are you sure you don't want to at least do a semester? And I said, no, I'm really quite sure.
Tell me about where the idea for Adore Beauty first came from, that women would prefer to buy their foundation online instead of at a chemist or a department store.
Well, it really came about because while I was at uni, I'm from Tassie originally, and I'd come to Melbourne to study, and I got fired from the first job that I had when I moved to Melbourne, and then ended up working for Clarins on the beauty counters and schlepping around to different department stores, which, I absolutely loved it. For me, it was so much fun because I'd always loved beauty. But I think because I saw the way that customers would often feel when they walked into a department store, and often they'd sort of slink up to the counter and you could kind of just tell that they were dreading it. The way that beauty was being sold to people was making them feel worse about themselves rather than better. And I thought, well, that is totally not the point of beauty. Beauty is supposed to make you feel confident and fabulous. And at uni, I was kind of really just getting to start to use the internet and just kept thinking to myself, I really hope someone does an online store for beauty, because I think so many people would prefer that.
It was 1999, 2000, so this is a time when really the internet was still, it was kind of the Wild West.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's for you to have that foresight at that time is quite incredible.
Well, it's incredible now. Everybody thought I was an idiot at the time. To me, it just made sense from a customer perspective. And also, too, I was from Tassie and I knew how frustrating it was to not be able to get the specific thing that you wanted. And even in the city, it's sometimes you're having to, I didn't have a car, and so you'd have to catch a couple of trains across town to be able to get a particular thing. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I really think there's a better way of doing this. And in the end, it was my boyfriend who said, are you going to do this or what? And honestly, it was not 1 second before then that I'd ever even contemplated the idea of starting a business.
You started with a loan of $12,000. Who gave it to you? It
was my boyfriend's dad. So he ran a motel out near the airport. So my family, we don't have an entrepreneurial or business background at all. And so this is the only business person I knew, and had come up with this idea and had sort of worked out, okay, what was the bare minimum amount of money that I would need to get it off the ground, and had sort of had a couple of initial discussions walking into a bank, which, if you can imagine the bank's response to a 21-year-old student who, has no business experience and wants to build something that's completely unheard of, you can imagine how well that went. And yes, talking to Bob, my boyfriend's dad, and he said, well, look, if you want to write up a business plan, I'll have a look at it. And so I went and borrowed some business plans for dummies books out of the library and sketched something out and presented that to him. And he said, yes, all right, I'll loan you the money. And handed me a cheque a couple of weeks later and said, you know what, this is going to be a really good experience for you. It's going to be, lots of really good learning. I think he fully expected to lose that money, and it was just a suburban motel. It wasn't like he was loaded or anything. But
yeah, he wasn't the Hilton.
He was not. He was not. And I think about that now a lot in retrospect, and I think, my goodness, what an extraordinary thing to do for somebody, to back them enough to take a punt. And also, too, there was never a moment of, well, you better not lose this and you better not mess it up. He fully gave me permission to fail, and I was just determined to pay him back.
What did you spend that first $12,000 on?
I had to get a website built, which was much harder in 1999 than it is now, and everything had to be built from scratch. I think that probably, from memory, cost about $8,000, and then I had a little bit of money left over for stock.
And what was that first year like when you were sitting in your garage, you're packing up those boxes and flinging them around the country? It was just you?
It was just me at the time. So my boyfriend had also we co-founded together, but of course he was actually still finishing his degree. He actually went all the way through law. Unlike me. And so it was just me in the garage to begin with. And look, it would have probably been more exciting if there was lots of, flinging packages around the country. But most of the time it was just nothing. It was just crickets.
Can you describe for me what that was like, though? Because it must have been a little isolating.
Very isolating, very depressing. I actually did get fully depressed about a year and a half into it. And yeah, I was just like, well, this is ridiculous. This is not going to work, and just couldn't face the idea of going there and sitting at my desk another day to, make no money. And I was living off nothing. So I was still studying my degree part-time, so I'd switched to distance ed. And so all I was living off, well, at the time it was Oz Study. I don't know what it is now. So it was like $200 a week, which in Melbourne pays for your rent, and that's about it. So, I couldn't go out with my friends. I couldn't afford to, eat anything much beyond, those little packet mee goreng noodles. I couldn't buy any clothes. It was pretty depressing. And I went back home to Tassie for a few weeks and let my mum look after me for a bit to try and decide whether or not I was going to chuck it in.
So I'm so interested in this moment where you've been working hard for a year and a half, you've got the $12,000, you've built the website, you're in your garage, but it's hard. You're still young, you could go and finish your degree, you could toss it in and no one would probably care. What made you keep going?
It's a really good question, and I still don't know, and I think there's probably just something in me that just makes me really stubborn, and I was just determined to be right. And also, too, in the end, I think, I was worried to fail because nobody likes to fail. But also, my mum said to me, she said, look, whatever happens, you're still you and you'll be fine. what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that, you give it another year and it doesn't work. And then, you chuck it in and you said, you can go and get a job. You're smart and, you can pay Bob back, and what have you lost? And I thought, yeah, that's probably fair. And given that I was still sort of trying to finish my arts degree at that point, it was probably a likely outcome anyway. So I thought, what hurt would it be to give it another year?
The first 10 years of Adore Beauty were steady but reasonably slow. And so was that a deliberate strategy?
It was the necessary strategy because I didn't have any other money. So I didn't really have any other choice rather than to just sort of try and slowly and organically and profitably grow the business because, I couldn't afford to burn cash because then I couldn't eat. It was literally a matter of word of mouth for a long time because if you think about it, I don't think there was any social media really until like kind of 2005. So it was really just a matter of trying to make every order so excellent and so fun to open that hopefully somebody would literally tell one other friend. And so that's kind of where our trademark of popping a little chocolate treat in the box came from, was just to hope that it would spread that word of mouth.
And you had many setbacks and knockbacks with some of the brands saying no at first. How did you deal with that?
Well, it was pretty much all of the brands saying no at first. So there was only 2 that I could get to actually take my money to go on the website. Initially, I'd sort of had these grand plans and had drawn up a list of all the brands that I wanted to have. And most of them you couldn't even get to take your calls. There were some that said, no, we just want to see how you go, in a nice kind of way. And there were others who said no in a not so nice way. And I do remember getting a 13-page rejection fax from one of them. This was on the fax machine at the motel because, of course, I couldn't afford my own fax machine. And so there it was rolling out of the motel fax machine on
next to the room service.
Yeah, 100%. And it was, the first page was just like, this is not a great idea and people are not going to buy premium beauty products in this way.
Wow.
And kind of words to the effect of, how dare you waste our time? And then the next 12 pages was thumbnails of the magazine covers of the magazines that this brand had been featured in.
What? Are you going to name names here, Kate Morris?
No, I'm not. I never have, and I shan't. I still have it. I will say that we stock that brand now, but...
Wow. Then a turning point, though. You decided to scale up. What changed your approach?
Well, it was really funny because about 10 years in, 2009, 2010, we'd still been continuing to grow every year, but it was about that time that the growth started to kind of plateau off a bit, and there was a year that we only grew by about 10%, and I sort of thought, oh, gee, is this all it's going to be? And I think we were about 3 million revenue by this point. And I thought, oh, if this is all it's going to be, then I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And I didn't know whether it was me that was doing something wrong and that maybe if I put someone in charge who actually knew what they were doing, maybe they would know what to do, or maybe I should just sell it. Maybe this was it and I should just try and sell it and go and do something else. And I didn't really know how to make that decision either. I just thought, how do I know what's the right answer here? I need some help with this. And so I went and paid a business coach who was charging like $500 an hour, which to me was like, all right, well, you better be good. For that kind of money, I'm not getting paid that. And she asked me a lot of questions, and in the end, she got me to go and write a letter to myself from 10 years in the future, which is now, incidentally.
Oh, yeah. What'd you tell yourself?
Oh, look, I did not dream big enough at all, clearly. But anyway, it's, to try and sort of draw this picture of what the business could be and what it could look like. And, she said, look, go into as much detail as you can. How much money does it make and what's your job in it and how do customers think about it and all of this kind of thing. And I went away and I thought, well, that sounds like a dumb idea. But I thought, well, I've paid the $500, I may as well do it. And went away and wrote this letter. And honestly, it was like turning all the lights back on. When you've been sort of sitting in the dark reading for a while and then someone comes in and goes, God, what are you reading in the dark for? And suddenly the whole path was just illuminated for me. And I just went, oh, no, I do know what to do. and I know what to do, and I know it has to be me that does it. And I was just completely reinvigorated to have kind of this new vision that I'd mapped out for myself. And then it was like, okay, but I also knew that to do these things, to get the business growing really fast again, I knew that the things that I needed to do would cost money. I didn't have any money. And so I thought, right, well, I'm going to need to raise some capital. But I knew that to be able to raise capital, I'd need to be able to show an investor that this could be a fast-growing business. And so I was sort of in this bit of a pickle. We remortgaged the house again up to its absolute limits. They were able to get like another couple of $100,000 or something, you know, bless the Melbourne housing market. And so, you know, basically it was just like, right, chips all in on the table, knowing that if this did not work or if we didn't raise money in time, I was going to lose everything.
So this is super scary, right? This high growth strategy is risky. You've done pretty well for the last 10 years. Was it really just that letter that cleared in your mind what you wanted to do next?
Yep. 100%. For me, it was, I knew I wanted the business to be more than what it was, and I knew that it had the potential to do that, but I think the letter was the part that unlocked it for me. I think the vision I'd set out was that by this stage we would have sales of like $20 million, and of course, you know,
it's a lot more than that.
It's quite a lot more than that, actually. Mm-hmm. Yep.
One of the keys was to sell a share to Woolworths. How did you do that deal?
This was about the point where I realised that we were going to need to raise some money, and I had a mentor who I'd been having coffees with every couple of months for a little while and had been tossing around this idea with her, and she one day said to me, if you're serious about doing this and you want me to make an intro, like I think I know some people who might be interested. And I said, oh, okay, yep, that sounds good. And she said, all right, well, could you get to Sydney in a week or two? And I said, yep, absolutely. And so then she phoned me back a few days later and said, right, I've set up this meeting for you with Woolworths. And I just pretty much, you know, laughed and spat my tea all over the desk and said, yes, that's very funny, Jane. And she said, no, I'm not joking. And I said, oh, okay, sure, right. And I thought, no, I can do this. It'll be fine. I'll just go in and, you know, negotiate against a $60 billion gorilla. It'll be cool. The deal itself took 14 months to do because for them, I mean, they're such a massive company. And, you know, even though the deal was, you know, from their perspective, very small, still had to kind of go through all of the big company hoops and red tape. And there were multiple times during that 14 months where we're still trying to execute on this fast growth so that they don't lose interest. And there were multiple times where we thought, oh, we're actually going to run out of money. I don't think we're going to make payroll next week.
One of your mantras has become, except there's things that you just aren't going to know, which is probably at the heart of this whole podcast curveball, that these things just come out of nowhere. You have to deal with them. So if you were trying to go high growth strategy and Woolworths is sort of taking a while and you didn't know if you had money in the bank next month, how did you deal with that curveball?
James, my co-founder, was working in the business with me by that time, and he would sort of look over at me and make the face and kind of tilt his head, which was, we need to go talk in the car park. And the car park was across the road, and we'd go out and sit in the car, and he would show me the spreadsheet and just said, look, I think we're going to run out of money next week. I think it's over. And we'd just sit there in the car and cry for a bit. And then we'd go, right, okay, if this is our last hurrah, how do we want to go down? Do we want to go down fighting? Yes, I think so. And so we would go back and grab all the team together and go, right, you know, we need to pull in an extra, you know, $100,000 of sales in the next week. How are we going to do it? What can we do? And we would sit there and we would brainstorm and we would pull some things out and we would just hustle and try and throw something together. And somehow we always skated through. And of course, we never told the team that actually if we don't achieve this, nobody's getting paid next week. But yeah, I think we just always managed to find enough hustle to kind of skate through it.
I'm going to come back to the rest of your successful story shortly, but I also am interested in your initial reaction when COVID hit Australia. How did you prepare for that?
To be honest, in some ways, it was not entirely dissimilar from other previous crises that we'd faced, things that we felt challenged the very existence of the business. And so for us, the unusual thing was the fact that every other business in Australia was also facing this same thing at the same time. We were kind of used to being on our own, but felt oddly prepared to be able to handle possible impending disaster. We started scenario planning, and that was basically to go, okay, right, well, let's sort of throw all of our previous forecasts out the window, because we could see the panic buying starting already, and it started first in hand sanitizer, which was never a big category for us. And then all of a sudden, every single kind of hand sanitizer we could get in would just sell out. And so we could sort of see strange behaviour starting already. And so we had some decisions to make. Should we perhaps pre-order some extra packaging, like shipping boxes? What are all of the brands that we have that are sourcing their stock from overseas? Let's run some other scenarios where perhaps our warehouse is forced to close, because of course if we can't ship orders, we can't take orders. And so we were kind of planning for how long could we go without revenue.
And that must have been extraordinary, because you're planning for both sort of double revenue if things are really flying off the shelves, like shampoo and hand sanitizer, as you said, because no one can actually go to the supermarket. But at the same time, as you say, like, what if we have to shut down and we have to lay staff off? So how did you do that double scenario planning?
You just get a bunch of spreadsheets and put in all your variables and kind of map it out.
Did you reach out to other businesses during the pandemic to work out, how are you doing things?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I remember at the start, one of the scariest things about it, and when we're trying to scenario plan, is that there was so little information and nobody knew what was going on, and the government didn't know what was going on, and nobody could give us any guidance. And I'd had a couple of texts from a couple of other different online retailers saying, hey, what are you guys doing about your warehouse? Or, what are you doing about your office? Are you guys working from home? What's going on? And do you think we should get maybe a couple of people on a call this week? And it was Friday morning, and I was walking to work and thinking to myself, we're going to need to get everybody together on this. The first thing I did when I sat down in the office was put together a Slack community and invited basically all of the other online retailers that I knew and said to them, look, invite everybody, because we all need to get together and share information about this, because nobody knew what was going on. It was really quite terrifying.
And are these, just to be clear, are these your competitors?
Some of them, but, by and large it might be, fashion retailers or book retailers. The online retail community in Australia is actually really quite tight-knit and lovely. And so people do like to share their expertise, because so much of what we go through, while your category might be different, the problems are all the same. And so by lunchtime, I reckon we had about 150 retailers on there. And everyone was sharing things like, does anyone have a working from home policy we could use? What are you guys doing in your warehouse about, hand sanitizer? Does anyone know where we could get masks from? Because there were businesses in very different situations. So there were businesses like ours where the sales were flying, but also there were other businesses like special occasion dress hire, for instance, where their business had just crashed through the floor, and there was no news at that point about JobKeeper or anything like that. And so people were actually doing things like trading staff. For people who didn't have any orders to pack, they're like, hey, I've got 6 warehouse people. Does anyone need like a spare pair of hands in Brisbane?
Amazing.
Yeah, it was just tremendous. And it's just one of those situations when there's so much uncertainty, any information is power, and we've just got to band together as a community and try and help each other out here and try and keep everybody afloat. And I think without that support, there could have been some really scary mental health outcomes for a lot of those smaller business owners in particular. But as it was, they felt like they had some support and a community on their side. So it was just tremendous for sharing information.
This is Curveball, the podcast where you're treated to the best seat in the house to witness the highs and lows in a company. We talk to top leaders to find out how they survived those challenges they couldn't see coming. Kate Morris is the founder of Australia's longest-running online beauty retailer, Adore Beauty. Kate, the other new addition to Adore Beauty is a selection of sex products like vibrators and condoms. How carefully did you consider going into that space?
We went into that space last year, so that was pre-COVID, but I must say it's a category that also did very well during COVID. Less so the condoms, but definitely much more, the sort of the self-pleasure devices, a woman's got needs. We put a huge amount of consideration into that category, actually, because we had very clear ideas of what we wanted this to mean, not just for our customers, but for Australian women generally. As I said, beauty for us has always been about self-care, and sexuality is such a core part of what it means to be a woman, but we felt that the whole experience for that category was just really not built for women at all.
Yeah, it's like a dark, dingy shop down on the part of town you don't want to go.
And it's degrading or it's intimidating. It's not tasteful. It's not enjoyable to shop for those things. And we thought, well, Australian women deserve to have a better experience. I guess our way of thinking at Adore is that we want to support you in whatever makes you the best version of you. And so we put a lot of thought. I reckon we worked on this for probably close to a year before launching, and we actually got together a cross-functional focus group of women of all different ages from right across our business, and and from different religious backgrounds and all of that sort of thing, to get together and actually just to start having these conversations and work out how we could help everybody to feel comfortable, because the last thing that we wanted for anybody was for us to offer a category of products on our site that made people feel uncomfortable, particularly adopting the principle of consent. One of the things that was surprisingly technically extremely difficult to do was, if you go to our site and navigate to the sex category or any category where these products might appear, there's kind of a little pop-up that appears and says, hey, we want to make sure you're comfortable. Here are the sorts of products that are in this category. If you feel uncomfortable with that, then here's the back button and you can click and go away. And overall, it's honestly been so spectacularly well received by our customers. And we got so many lovely messages and emails that just said, thank goodness someone is prepared to offer this in a way that is inclusive and tasteful and safe.
And Kate, how is that category selling for you?
It's selling really well, actually, and continuing to grow. We're still being very cautious in terms of the way that we market it. So we're still being quite discreet about it to get everybody used to the idea. But yes, there's a few products in particular that have been mentioned in our podcast, the Beauty IQ Uncensored podcast, that have been extremely popular. And as I said, it's certainly grown a lot during COVID.
Right at the heart of the pandemic, you floated on the stock exchange. Tell me how that worked.
Oh, boy. It was a fairly intense lockdown project, I have to say.
Yeah, you could have just made some sourdough or something.
Right? I know. For me, it was kind of almost, the dream that I'd never dared to dream. Adore Beauty being a listed company. It was something that I saw as, I guess, a really key step in terms of building something that was going to be able to endure. And I guess after running and bootstrapping for such a long time, I really wanted to give the business that opportunity to be able to go on and continue to grow for another 20 years, another 50 years, because I actually think the culture that we've built and the conversations that we're able to be having now with beauty consumers, that's something really special and worth protecting and worth building for. And so that was, for at least the last couple of years, we'd been building towards it. I didn't expect that we'd be doing it virtually during a pandemic and running all the road shows over Zoom.
How do you manage an IPO during lockdown?
Well, look, I think necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And to be honest, I think it's probably the sort of thing that before COVID, everyone would have said, oh, no, you can't possibly do that remotely. And we proved that you could, because I did it all from the front room of our house.
And what was it like to ring the bell on Zoom?
Look, it's not the picture I had in my head.
Because there's that scene where Sarah Jessica Parker in Sex and the City goes to the stock exchange in New York and she gets to ring the bell and she's there in her, glamorous outfit. You're just there in your lounge room, right?
Yeah, year. We were kind of hoping that we'd be out of lockdown by then and able to get to Sydney to go to the ASX. And the closer we got to it, the more we realised that it was not going to happen. And I'd planned out my outfit and everything. And in the end, I just had to sort of reassess my expectations and go, okay, well, it's a pretty amazing moment regardless. Yes, it would have been lovely to be there in person, but as they say at my daughter's kinder, you get what you get and you don't get upset. So and the ASX sent us a bell to ring and a bottle of champagne to crack afterwards.
Did you benefit from the lockdown in that people who were wanting to invest would have suddenly seen online retail as very viable?
I think what happened was that, the vision that I'd had for 20 years of everybody shopping online and that, gradually over many, many years people were getting on board with. I think when COVID came along and all of a sudden there was just this rapid fast forward shift, it's kind of one of those industrial revolution moments, but in fast forward, and everybody suddenly realised, oh, e-commerce is going to be a thing. And I sort of thought to myself, yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you for 20 years. I think that was the moment that everybody really realised that this thing had legs and was only going to continue to grow. And so, yes, certainly the market was receptive.
When the company floated, you attracted some raised manicured eyebrows about the price tag. The company landed at around $618 million. Was that super high?
No, where we priced it was actually at a material discount to other online retailers that were listed, and we're actually really heavily oversubscribed. So we could have sold the float more than twice over.
Is it because you decided to value it more like a tech company than, say, a makeup company?
Actually, makeup companies get higher valuations than what we got. So if you look at the sale of Drunk Elephant, I think they got 8.5 times revenue, which is certainly substantially higher than Adore. Everybody will have different opinions whether it's too expensive or not. And the truth is that we're really heavily oversubscribed by a lot of institutional and retail investors and people that take a really long-term view, because I think everybody can see that e-commerce is only going to continue to grow. And if you look at where it is in Australia, online penetration's about, 12%. And in China, it's pushing 40 or 50%.
I think it was one of the first, or certainly in a handful of the first female-led companies to list on the stock exchange in Australia. And women started to flock to it in terms of wanting to trade on the share market for the first time or to buy stocks for the first time. Was that kind of exciting that there were women who had never bought shares ever before who were suddenly going, I'm going to get into this whole thing?
You know what? That was one of the really wonderful and amazing and exciting parts about it for me. And, it just goes to show why representation really matters, because I think there were a whole bunch of women who had been thinking perhaps about getting involved in equities investing, but could never really find a company that they really connected with and saw the potential of. And I guess, Adore's the biggest ever with a woman founder and woman CEO. So it was actually, to me, just one of those moments where I went, wow, I didn't even think about this side of it. I was kind of trying to find a way to, enable the company to continue to go on and grow and take all its opportunities. And what it created was something that meant something to a lot of women. And that was just wonderful.
Do you think you've faced more challenges in business being a woman?
I think there are a lot of structural issues that do make it harder for women, and particularly when that comes to raising capital. And I think we are seeing some change, and particularly in venture capital in Australia, there's a lot of progress in terms of the number of women partners in VC firms and, for them actively looking to invest in diverse founded businesses. But from my experience, the further up you go in the funding chain, so once you get up to private equity, and even more so when we were pitching our IPO to fund managers, I'd say 90% of the people we pitched to were men. And I guess the challenge there, when you're pitching a business that is by women and for women, you're asking those investors to do extra work in terms of understanding what it means. And I remember the first couple of times we pitched, and after the questions we were asked, we actually had to go back and revise the deck because I realised that we actually needed to do more work just in explaining the way that beauty is actually a self-care purchase and that it matters to customers kind of where you buy it from, and you don't want it to just come kind of chucked in a box with, a pair of socks and some spare batteries and an iPad. Like, the fact that this is an emotional purchase and people are buying to feel a particular way needed to be explained because these people weren't our customers.
You mentioned there that venture capital funding and trying to raise that capital, and I know you're now a mentor with StartMate that helps startups get off the ground. What kind of responsibility do you see now that you are a very successful business owner in helping others?
It's everybody's responsibility. If you manage to make it any way up the ladder, then your job is to turn around and extend a hand down and try and bring some more people up with you. And, and I've said, particularly when we IPO'd, that yes, we've broken records here today, but I hope this record doesn't stand for years. I hope someone else comes and smashes it in a couple of months and that then it gets smashed again. Yeah, so I love mentoring. I find it immensely enjoyable, and so much of the work that I do with women entrepreneurs is about how do you unlock the barriers that are in your own head, because I think as women we're conditioned to think small and be reasonable and be risk averse, and when that's the way that you've been treated your whole life, it's very hard then to start thinking in a different way when you become an entrepreneur.
There's a bit of a third phase for your business now. So tell me about your commitment to sustainability.
That's something that we've been doing a lot of work around. And to me, that's something that's important just as our corporate duty. There's no point being successful if you're trashing the planet to do it. And so we've put quite a lot of work in, around areas like waste reduction. So we were able to implement a new box sizing system in our warehouse, which is horrendously expensive and involved volumetrically scanning every single product on our shelf, of which there are over 11,000, and putting in a new $500,000 piece of software that can actually instantly calculate the smallest possible size for any order based on the products that are going to be in it, and that's helped to save over 27 tons of cardboard in the first year. We managed to do this special kind of ceramic coating on the roof of our warehouse that helps to keep it warmer in winter and cooler in summer, so that we don't have to use as much power for cooling and heating. We have a no disposable coffee cups rule, and everybody in the office knows that I'm the first one to go berserk about it if they get spotted with a takeaway coffee cup, and so it's actually part of our employee induction that everyone gets given a keep cup. But it's always a work in progress, and so the next step is we want to actually do like a carbon audit right across our business and identify, okay, what are the next areas that we can start to improve, because I just think we have a responsibility.
What about representation of a more diverse group of women in the beauty industry? I know that Zoe Foster-Blake from Go-To Skincare is pushing this a lot. Why has it taken so long for the industry just to do simple things like have a greater variety of foundation, which I know is a thing that you've now established a company on?
We've done a lot of work on that, and so we've been working on foundation shades for probably 3 years now, and it's been a long process. And I don't think it ever came from any kind of ill will. I think it comes from, if you don't have enough diverse representation within your company, then there are things that you just don't see. And, I don't know, I'm guilty of that too, because it was actually our marketing manager who said to me 3 years ago, Kate, I need to tell you something. I've been with this company for 5 years and I can't buy my foundation shade here. And I was just so mortified and ashamed that I'd let her down, and not just her, but all of the women that looked like her. And I just went, wow. It's a really eye-opening moment when you see one of your own blind spots, and we've been working a lot over the last few years to make sure that we do carry a really full and representative range, and also that the images that we show and the models or pictures that we show on our social feeds or in our emails, that they also represent diversity, not just in skin tone, but in age or religion. Or I think it's so important for people to be able to see themselves as beautiful, no matter what your background might be or what your skin tone is.
You have 2 children with your partner in life and your partner in business, James, but there was a curveball when your first child was born. What happened?
Look, she was born with a cleft palate. You kind of have all these pictures in your head of, what being a mum is going to be like, and a lot of that sort of got thrown out the window, and, having to go through the surgery when she was 10 months old and all of that sort of thing, which I remember it being very overwhelming and feeling like it was very full on for the first few days and a lot to cope with. But you know what, once we started when you go into the children's hospital for your visits with the surgeon and you see what some other families are dealing with, and we just looked at each other and went, you know what, we actually just got really lucky, because this is a thing that is easily fixable. And yes, I'm spending an extra 20 hours a week pumping breast milk, which is kind of like another part-time job in and of itself, over the top of running a business and being a mum. But that's nothing compared to what a lot of families have to deal with.
That's interesting about your mindset there, that switch between I could feel a little sorry for myself here and look at it as a glass half empty situation, but you flipped your thinking. How often do you do that in your business?
I think you kind of have to do it all the time, don't you? I mean, if you're going to keep going, and that's, I guess, when I talk to my mentees, this is a marathon and not a sprint. And one of the biggest things that you need to look after is your own mental health and your ability to keep going. And so I guess I'm a pretty positive person generally. And I think, well, whatever the problem is, I'm sure we can deal with it. And so if there's something we can do about it, then we'll do that. And if there isn't, well, then there's nothing we can do about it, and there's no point worrying. I mean, which is not to say that I don't have my days where you just think, oh gosh, I can't deal with this today. I just want to crawl under my doona and stick my doona over my head and not think about it. But you don't have any choice, so you saddle up and you keep going.
And I've started my own company for the first time in my entire life after having a very stable job for the best part of 20 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Although I don't have the benefit of youth on my side like you did.
No, but you have experience.
A few more grey hairs. What's the thing that you would tell someone like me about starting up when it's, there are some great moments, but it's really bloody hard in those early days?
I'm going to tell you something that I realised myself probably only about a year ago, and that is that it has to be hard. It has to be hard because if it wasn't hard, everybody would be doing it and then you would have no business. So each business must have a hard thing or several hard things that only you is willing to overcome. And once I realised that, honestly, it makes me feel so much better about all of the difficult things, because as far as I can see, in my 20 years experience at least, most business journeys are pretty much, brief moments of success in between longer moments of slog and difficulty. And it's just, it has to be that way.
And it's exactly what this podcast is about, because, I mean, if people read about you in the press, it's you're a multi-millionaire and, it's all roses, right?
I have everything easy, yeah.
But it's such a slog, and many, many years between those little peaks that you've had. Is there anything else that you would tell the 21-year-old you?
I think I would probably just tell her to dream bigger. The temptation for women generally is to keep ourselves small or don't get too big for our boots. And now what I would say is, get too big for your boots. Think bigger. Why not you? We all need to actually cherish and grow our ambition and incubate it and fan it like a flame, because we need to see more women at the top.
Kate Morris, thank you so much for the inspiration and for leading a female-led company onto the stock exchange. Congratulations, and thanks for being on Curveball.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
We have so many great leaders coming up on Curveball, stories of surviving and thriving in challenging times. I'd love you to subscribe to the show so that you're alerted each time a new episode comes out. And you can listen to Curveball on the podcasting app of your choice, from the iHeartRadio app to Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And I'm loving hearing from you all how you're faring in your own curveball moments. Please do send me a short voice memo by recording yourself on your phone and email me the audio file. Send it to hello@deadsetstudios.com. Instructions on how to do this are on our website, curveballshow.com. And our inbox is always open. Please suggest a guest you'd like to hear from on the show.
I had a flotation sort of vest on and wetsuit, and the violence of the hold down, it broke the zip open and actually exploded the wetsuit open, which if you think about it, you really do get quite violently held down and thrashed around, and it was a 20-foot wave, and it blew my wetsuit open and it filled up with water. So at that point, even though I had the flotation vest on to try and sort of help me get to the surface, I couldn't get up because it was full of water, and that was sort of holding me down. And yeah, it was intense, and you have to sort of really go to a place of you try and stay calm and all those things, but in those moments, that was a position where I was like, well, hang on a sec, this is not good.
Some incredible insights from World Surf League boss Andrew Stark. Make sure you're subscribed to Curveball to hear it. Curveball's a production of Dead Set Studios, and this episode was produced by me, Kelly Reardon, along with Hannah Kinder, Kim Lester and Rachel Fountain.